Hello and welcome to the British Sitcom History Podcast. My name is Alan. With me, as always, is Gareth.
Hello, Tossers.
And the language of the 90s there, as we skip back today to the mid-90s to review Game On.
Yeah, sorry, that was a rude way for me to start the podcast, wasn't it? But yeah, it's kind of in keeping with the tone of Game On, I think.
Rude, yeah. Is that our summing up?
Rude as in a little bit risque, but also rude as in quite unpleasant to each other.
Yeah, so Game On, one of the more obscure things we're looking at this series, but definitely in our wheelhouse, our generation, I suppose. 95, the first series went out. You would have been a young man, very much in keeping with the people in the show.
Yeah, I mean, I was 20 in 1995, so I'm kind of a similar age. And then a couple of years later, moved to London and lived with friends in a flat not unlike this, really. But it's interesting you say this is one of the more obscure sitcoms that we've looked at, because to me it's a real touchstone of my youth, and I guess that's just about my place in time, isn't it? But what's really interesting, we're obviously going to get into more detail later, but there's a cast change in Game On. So we've got 3 series, we've got 3 main stars, and then at the end of series 1, Ben Chaplain leaves, he goes to Breck America, and he's replaced by Neil Stuke, and obviously we'll talk about that in a lot more detail, but my memory of Game On is Ben Chaplain. Now, I was vaguely aware that they'd got rid of him and Neil Stuke had come in, and I think I'd maybe seen a couple of episodes, but what this is telling me is that the first series of Game On is what I remember, and I suspect, looking at the dates, that's because I'd sort of moved out and, had a different lifestyle by the time the second series came out. I stopped watching telly, basically. So yeah, it was interesting to me watching this all again, and we watched the whole, there's 3 series, we watched all of them. It was interesting watching this again to see that quite significant change in tone between series 1 and series 2 and 3. Obviously, we've got the cast change, but it's not just a different person doing the same thing. It feels like the character changes as well.
Yeah, I think we'll get into that.
Yeah, well, what's your memory of Game On? You're 9 years younger than me. How do you remember it?
I definitely remember it. I think I watched it at the time. I would have been a teenager, 13, 14, that kind of range. So not quite the same recognition factor, but it was just funny and silly and laddish, and in the mid-90s that was okay. But I remember watching it, I remember generally enjoying it, I had good memories of it. Rewatching it now, it's funny how much it's aged. So, it's only 25 years, well, I guess it feels really 25 aged. Years, but that's quite a long time, I guess, when you really come down to it. But there's some references, and I think Series 1, more than the later series, has got much more kind of cultural signifiers of the 90s.
Yeah, music and film references, yeah.
So it was very interesting to watch it again. And I think overall I enjoyed it, but I'm sure I'll find things to criticise.
Well, it's interesting. You say it's dated, and I do agree with you there. And it was very much of its time. When we were deciding what to watch this series, we wanted to watch a 90s sitcom, and not just a sitcom that was made in the 1990s, but, a 90s sitcom. And basically, we came down to Men Behaving Badly or Game On as the most 90s of sitcoms. And, having not watched Men Behaving Badly for quite a while either, it's going to struggle to be more 90s than this.
I think I'll be comparing this to Men Behaving Badly at some point later on as well. It feels like that's an obvious kind of touchstone. Whereas Game On was much more... I have seen it being referred to as a cult hit. Okay. It was a bit more of an underground thing. One for the students, I guess. Despite hating students itself as a show.
Well, I'll tell you what, the plan for the podcast is we are going to, as we always do, we're going to review an episode. And the episode that we've picked is Series 2, Episode 2. Ready for the title? Slime Surfers and Jism Monkeys.
Nice. Catchy.
But before we get into Series 2, what I thought would be a good thing to do, why don't we talk about Series 1 first and talk about Ben Chaplain, and then we can talk about the changes, probably by going through that episode a little later on. So, Alan, set up Game On for us. Series 1, as it starts, what's the setup?
So it's a flat share in Battersea. 3 young people. The age is a bit variable depending on what they say, but they're supposed to be like early to mid-20s.
Yeah.
And they are all originally from Herne Bay, which, for anyone who doesn't know, it's sort of on the east coast. It's where people go to die. And they've grown up there. And Matt and Martin, the two men there, they are childhood friends. They're at school together. Mandy is a friend of Martin's older sister. So she's a couple of years older, but she's also known them since they were kids. Yeah. And then as we develop in the series, we get a little bit more information. What we find out is that Matt's parents died in a car accident, and using the money and the inheritance he got, he bought this flat. And so he lives there for free, essentially. And the other two are living with him, paying him rent. And so because they're making their lives in London, in the big city. And again, like you were saying, Gareth, that's exactly what you did pretty much. You went down to London to find your fortune. And so many people did that. And especially in the 90s, it was more affordable than it is now to do that.
It was a lot less affordable than Yorkshire was, even in 1997 when I did it. But yes, I think it's a different dimension now. What's interesting, you setting it all up like that. What was it? I found that wasn't obvious. It's quite good that they sort of revealed information as it went along. I mean, it's fairly obvious that we got these three people who are living together and that they're not romantically linked.
Yeah, it's just a young people's flat share, and then we get a little bit of background information as it goes along, which I think is quite nice. There is definitely episodes out of order here.
Oh, really?
Well, a very specific example I can think of is we see Matt's surfboard has a big iron mark on it, and he's annoyed because Mandy burnt it with the iron. And then 3 episodes later, that happens in the episode, and she tells him that she's done that, and he's like, oh my God. So that's definitely just a very specific example of continuity that's out of whack. But generally speaking, they're fairly episodic. But they'd obviously switch something around in that first series for the sake of...
I'm putting this down to gradual exposition and quite clever filmmaking. And it's just that they've randomised the order of the episodes.
Possibly. But yeah, they don't go to great pains to explain it first off. It's just some young people in a flat share. That's fine.
Yeah. And as we sort of understand the characters, they're very broadly drawn, aren't they? So Matthew, who, as we know, owns the flat, doesn't have to work and never leaves the flat. And we sort of discover that he's got a kind of agoraphobia and he won't go outside. But he's a horrible man. He's a really nasty piece of work. He bullies the other 2 members of the household. He's got financial control over them, and he's just a nasty piece of work.
Morning, Mark. Morning, Matt. Going surfing?
No.
Oh. And yourself? Going to that poxy bank? Have to, Matt. It's called work. Don't get witty with me, mate, or I'll break your arms. I was watching that. Can't stand that ugly ginger tosser. He's right up his own arse.
Then we've got Martin, who, as you say, is his childhood friend. I assume Matthew's been bullying Martin since they were, 3 years old. And that is very much the pattern. So, he does as he's told. He goes out and he works, and he's very much a sort of loser. He's a ginger tosser. And he's very crudely sketched as bit of a loser.
I'll tell you something else I noticed in the shift from series 1 to 2. I don't remember at any point in series 1 Martin's ginger hair being mentioned in any way.
Oh, really?
So I reckon that series was written before they cast it.
Ah, yes. Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that because I didn't notice that. I obviously called him a ginger tosser, which that's not coming from me. That's coming from the script. But yeah, so that didn't happen until the second series. That's interesting.
I didn't go back and sort of double check that, but I'm sure there's not. It's not as common. It's funny. Certainly something they really gear up for series 2.
So now our third member of the flat is Mandy, who is well. This is where we get a bit 90s about it. She's basically just what's the word? I'm trying not to use I'm trying to use a more scientific word. She's very profligate in her attentions to male admirers.
Yeah, well done.
Thanks. Well, this is very much set in the 90s. Ladette culture was a thing. Ginger Spice went on the Brit Awards and flashed her fanny, and it was all right. It was all right for girls to behave like boys, even though it becomes fairly obvious that Mandy's deeply unhappy and desperately trying to fill a need that she can't fulfill.
Yeah, I think Mandy's a really interesting character because, like you say, there was this Ladette culture coming through, which, it, for all its flaws, was about empowering women to do what they wanted to do. And Mandy, as she develops, is a really interesting character because she has this... She's sort of sick of being seen as just a pretty face. She wants to be respected for her intelligence and her work ethic, etc., etc. But she's also a right old slag and she loves it. she loves getting shagged.
That is basically the way it's written, yeah.
And I think it's a great, interesting character, actually. A little bit more of a developed character, that she's not just one or the other. She is conflicted, as most people are in real life.
You know, she works. She's kind of a temp / secretary. Wants to be a writer, but every time she seems to get an opportunity, it turns out that the boss is just interested in her body. We have an example is Dave Hill, who we've seen many times appear in sitcoms, he plays a northern writer, and he's quite a caricature. He wants her to help him with his research, and obviously it turns out that he just wants to research her pants.
Well, I do need some research doing on my new book.
What, a job, do you mean?
Yeah, job.
Not as your secretary, though, right?
No, like I said, you'd be doing research. You'd be a researcher, like.
Researcher? Well, how do you know I'd be any good?
You've suffered. I've suffered. We'll get on, I know it.
It's funny how that stuff is played off in a very 90s way. It's not like, oh my God, this is absolutely disgraceful behaviour. You can't behave like that. It is very much like, another one just trying to shag me.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I actually shagged him. What's wrong with me? Why do I do it? So it's a bit dated in that sense, but I really like the way that Mandy is portrayed, like the way that the character develops and her sort of internal conflict with that. And that kind of idea that, you don't just have to kind of go, oh no, I'm not going to be used for sex. It's wrong. Like, no, I actually like sex. I do actually like it. So I want to enjoy that. I want to enjoy that side of my life.
As I said, when we first meet these characters, they're very crudely drawn. They're very, very broad stereotypes. But as time passes, we get backstory and we get some kind of... they expand on why they are these characters. And certainly that's best done with Mandy. I don't think it's very well done with Martin. We don't really get much background on him, but...
We'll talk about this later, actually. We'll talk about the writers, but this is written by a woman. Mm-hmm. I think that shows in the Mandy character particularly, apart from anything else. But we'll get into that later.
So the three actors in the first series, we've got Samantha Janus, now Samantha Womack, who is Mandy, Matthew Cottle, who plays Martin, and then Ben Chaplain, who plays Matthew. Now, we'll talk about the other two as we go further on, but seeing as Ben Chaplin's only in this first series, why don't we have a little focus on Ben Chaplain?
Yeah, Ben Chaplain, nothing too dramatic in his background, middle class, drama school, etc. And he was building a career throughout the early 90s, just generally getting work. Game On was certainly his most notable TV role at the time, what suddenly made him a bit more of a recognisable face. And Game On wasn't like this huge, massive hit. It was a... BBC Two kind of late night show, aimed for the students and the young people, Bear in mind, in 1995, so that's the same year that the first series went out, he was nominated for an Olivier Award for a role he'd done in a play on the West End. So, he was on the rise, obviously. He's clearly had something to show.
An actor, not from the world of comedy, he was an actor.
Yeah, definitely. And for whatever reason, yes, it got him noticed. And dare I say, he had a certain look. Looked right.
I don't want to objectify the guy, but it's the 90s, so I'm going to. He's a really handsome guy. Like, he is what we might call a conventionally good-looking man. He looks like a model. Yeah,
but it's not even that he's like, oh my God, look at that guy. He feels like, we talked a little bit about this on our Miranda episode with Tom Ellis, who also went to Breck America. He's kind of handsome in a still realistic and attainable way. It's not quite just ridiculous like model. He's just TV handsome,
I don't know about that, mate. I think I disagree with that. I think he's quite dreamy.
But it's not just the look though. He's got the attitude, and let's face it. What I mostly know him from is this and playing Matt here. But he's brooding and dark, and we're going to talk about the changes in that character. But that character is dangerous. That character is a bad boy, and it's quite sexy. There's something very sexy about that.
Yeah.
In a way that Neil Stuke, God bless him, is never going to have.
Agreed. I don't want to be unkind because Neil Stuke's not an ugly man, but he's not. No, yeah, it's he's not. Thing. He's not in the same league.
Neil Stuke is not getting targeted to play a romantic lead in a big Hollywood film opposite Uma Thurman and Janine Garofalo, which is what happened to Ben Chaplin. He got headhunted essentially to go and do an American film called The Truth About Cats and Dogs.
Yeah, now I remember that as I remember the name of it, and you sent me a trailer which I watched, and obviously I've never seen the film. But yeah, it's Janine Garofalo wants to go out with Ben Chaplin, but she's dreadfully ugly, as you know. Janine Garofalo is like a troll.
Janine Garofalo, hideous, disgusting,
and therefore she has to pretend her friend Uma Thurman. I don't know, rubbish.
It's Cyrano de Bergerac, basically. It's
where right, okay, all right.
the one that actually falls in love with her personality, but she's telling the pretty one what to say, and so
I didn't catch that from the trailer.
Yeah. Presumably at the end, he falls in love with the disgusting, short,
Janine
fat,
Garofalo.
and ugly one, the Hollywood star Janine Garofalo. Yeah, and the film seemed to do okay, but his career didn't take off.
Well, I know that he'd gone to America, and I remember him being in The Thin Red Line, which is a war film.
Yeah.
But so it wasn't like a big breakout role or anything. And then I basically disappeared without a trace. I haven't heard of him for years. I remember him being in a Sky drama a few years ago, but that's basically it.
It's kind of true, but also a little bit unfair. You look at his CV, he's working. He stayed in America for several years and was doing plenty of work, and not exactly just like nothing he worked. Decent roles, but nothing star-making and nothing too like crazy. But he seems to have retained a good reputation as an actor, and he was nominated for another Olivier Award in 2003 for another play. So he's doing theatre work as well. He seems to have returned to TV the last sort of 10 years or so, doing more British stuff again.
Yeah.
And he was in a show called Press, which was about these two kind of tabloid newspapers that were battling each other, and you saw both sides of the newspaper offices.
Oh, yes. No, that does ring a bell. Yes, he played a sort of, like the Sun editor, didn't he? He was a kind of, it wasn't the Sun, but that's exactly what it was supposed to be.
Yes,
I do remember that, yes.
Yeah, well, I worked on that, so I've seen him in action in person, and
okay.
He was really good. The scene I was in he was doing this kind of impassioned sort of speech to the team in his newspaper office. He was giving them all kind of tub thumping stuff, and he just did it. He had to do it like 18 times, just from different camera angle. We're doing this now, and he just knocked it out of the park every time. Maintained the passion, and
that's good.
That's like in terms of TV acting, where you just have to do take after take after take. That's what you want. Solid professional. Still got a sort of devastatingly handsome style of him, even though he's in his 50s now, but he's still got it.
Okay.
But yeah, the main thing to take from all that is this sort of dark, brooding vibe that he brings to the character. And I think Series 1 in general has a darker vibe.
There were several times watching Series 1 where it feels really uncomfortable. Like, it feels like that flat is a toxic environment. Particularly for Mandy, it feels like a dangerous place for her to be. And also for Martin, who's perhaps not at risk in quite the same way, but it feels like it feels like a coercive relationship.
Toxic is the word there. If we think of toxic masculinity, that's what Matt is. Matt is an embodiment of toxic masculinity. Whereas the second Matt is kind of pathetic. We understand that this is a superficial veneer. He's pretending to be this great guy because he's actually pathetic, and it's very obvious. With Ben Chaplin Matt,
it's not so obvious.
It's not obvious because you think if he went out and kind of addressed the world, he could get attention from women. He could make men think this is a great way to live. And I don't know if you're aware of a man called Andrew Tate, who is the sort of embodiment of toxic masculinity.
I have a teenage boy. We've had that talk, yes.
And I think there's certain people that have these traits and, for whatever reason, can put them across in a way that seems appealing to, perhaps teenage boys, to people who don't know any better. And that's how Ben Chaplin Matt felt to me. This one felt like,
that's a good
this
comparison.
Is dangerous. This guy could be a cult leader. Like, that's how...
Yes.
There's something about him that draws you in, but he's dangerous. They just about get away with it because Mandy kind of has none of it. He'll say like, "Look, you owe me 6 months' rent, but if you shag me, I'll let it go." And she obviously finds a way around that. But she never countenances it really. She's just sort of shuts him down. And so it's we really need that strong woman there to give us a bit of balance because Martin is completely overawed by him.
Yeah, very much so. Well, we sort of started to talk about the differences there in Series 2, and we'll move that way in a minute. But just before, while we're on the subject of Series 1, one of the other changes, which you already mentioned, was there were a lot of contemporary cultural references in that first series. A lot of music choices, some film references. In fact, I started writing them down. The first couple of episodes, I thought, oh, this is a thing. I'll write this down and make a list. And really, interestingly, the list kind of ended with Series 1. So there's a whole load of sort of Britpop songs that are used either... Well, they're all sort of done diegetically, so either he's listening to them or he's singing along to them, that kind of thing.
Preachers.
Some of my very favourite songs of the time, and also Girls and Boys by Blur. But then they also do, they do the classic, they do like film references, so he cuts Martin's Teddy's ear off, and like the Reservoir Dogs thing.
He does a lot of impressions,
driver
doesn't he,
thing.
actually,
Yeah. So that's like set up as Matt's home alone all day and he's just occupying himself, and we see some of that. It's very contemporary, that. It really roots it in a time and place.
But there it is. That's the character he is. There's a certain kind of wanker who is like, yeah, taxi driver, that's cool. Yep. Reservoir Dogs, cuts his ear off, that's so cool. There was a certain type in the mid-90s. And like, hey, I love Reservoir Dogs, I love a taxi driver. But those are not the characters to aspire to be. Those are not the people you
Reservoir
want to look
Dogs,
up to.
The moment in Reservoir Dogs that I always think about is when Tim Roth is escaping from the heist and the civilian shoots him and he kills her. And that moment where he's like, oh my God, what have I done? That's the moment in Reservoir Dogs, not the cutting the bloody ear off. I'm not 7. We're not the British Reservoir Dogs podcast, so never mind. So yeah, before we move to Series 2, just one more thing about this Ladette culture that we had. I think the reason why it hit me so hard about how misogynistic this was, this toxic masculinity, is that, I was that age, and we kind of thought we were so progressive. I think all we did was we were just the same, but we convinced girls they loved it. I think that's what Ladette culture was. We see Matt. He's reading Loaded, and I used to read Loaded. That sort of it was very painful to watch sometimes. I'm certainly not going to say I was as bad as Matt Malone, but there was a couple of notes of familiarity where I thought
a bit too close to the bone, that one.
Yeah.
Well, I think you keep bringing up Ladette culture as if it was not preceded by lad culture.
Yeah, sure, of course.
Yeah,
of course.
Which is obviously where it's come from. But I think Ladette culture really took hold with the Spice Girls. You mentioned them earlier. I think that was the sort of the mainstream push of it. This is before that. The first series, at least, of Game On, it predates the Spice Girls. So I think we're still very much in lad culture here. We're still in men behaving badly level of culture. And let's not forget, we're not getting to men behaving badly, but there are 2 very strong female characters in Men Behaving Badly who are constantly the betters of the 2 slightly idiotic male characters. Even that show is sort of self-puncturing, but it displays a lifestyle that was sort of perfectly acceptable, I guess, and not especially toxic by its own standards.
Let me give you one example that we've not mentioned before we move on to our episode. One day when the other 2 are out at work, Matt goes into Mandy's bedroom and he's going through her knicker drawer, and then when she comes home from work, he is asleep in her bed in her knickers.
Yeah, is that crossing a line? Is it?
That's a restraining order, not a clip round the ear.
Well, and obviously what she gets out of it is that she gets off the 6 months' worth of rent that she's due. She just blackmails him for it, basically. Which, 6 months of rent, £2,000, by the way.
Interesting, yeah.
Definitely couldn't get that these days. But... yeah, so it kind of ends with her being, the winner, the victor in that situation, and she's using his weaknesses against him. But yeah, that's a creepy thing to do.
It is a bit creepy, isn't it? All right, so let's move on to our episode then. So we're going to go into Series 2, and we've actually picked the second episode, and I'm going to say it again: Slime Surfers and Jism Monkeys. And what's happened since the first series, in the first episode that we've missed of Series 2, a couple of our characters have had slight changes. Mainly Martin has got a girlfriend, and that's completely changed his outlook. He's now getting a shag, as he puts it. Yeah. And also, for reasons I can't quite remember, Mandy has decided to go celibate.
Yeah, because she's just too busy shagging everyone. She's sick of it.
Meanwhile, Matthew has undergone the character change of being a different actor. And as we're going to discuss, the character has changed a little bit. Let's talk about the new actor then. First question, pronunciation corner. I'm saying Stook, you're saying No, you're saying Stook, I'm saying Stuke. I can't
No,
remember.
I'd say Stu.
What do we think? You're saying Stuke, I'm saying Stook.
Yeah, I'll tell you why. Because my American friend who keeps saying, "Oh, let's go on the tube," and I have to correct her to tube. So it's, I think it's got to be Stuke, right?
Do you know what? I think that's a good enough reason. I'm going to change my... Stuke it is. Okay. So yeah, tell us a little bit about the actor, Neil Stuke, and then we'll get into the episode.
Yeah, so Neil Stuke, obviously brought on to replace the much-loved character here. He was already 30 by this point, so fair number of credits in his background, but not a specialist in comedy by any means. The only other major sitcom role on his CV here was the Reggie Perrin remake they did with Martin Clunes. So that was later. That was 2009, 2010, in which he played the boss. He played the I didn't get
CJ.
where I am today by replacing other actors role. So I don't think he's actually called CJ. It might be a different character name, but the same character, yeah.
Yes.
And his other major regular work is in the show Silk. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's not a sitcom.
I've never seen that.
It's sort of legal drama.
Yeah.
And he's working, he's worked regularly, but without great fanfare. There's not an obvious comedy connection there. But I think he brings a real comedic energy to this role. And that's why it changes the character so dramatically.
So we open our episode then with a close-up on Martin. Mm-hmm. And Martin is mooning over the fact that he's now got a girlfriend.
Mm.
So Martin's gone from this sad little puppy to getting a girlfriend to being incredibly annoying about it. When he finally gets this girlfriend, I'm really happy for him. And then literally one episode later, I wanted to leave him because I'm sick of it.
I've got a girlfriend.
Martin.
I've got a girlfriend and she loves me.
Do us a favour, mate.
I've got a girlfriend and she loves me and we shag.
Shut up, Martin!
Which is exactly how his housemates feel about it.
Yeah. So this is playing out him mooning on about how good he is at shagging and how in love he is and all of these things. And he's constantly going on about it and they're rolling their eyes and telling him to shut up. That's just not great telly, is it? Like, the point is he's being boring about it. Yeah, he is being boring about it.
Well, I like it. I think it reminded me of being, well, he's obviously a bit older, but, when you're 16 and you get your first girlfriend and you're just like, you're obsessed with it. And it's like that's that mentality that they're embodying.
I do get it, but I just think it went on too long.
Well, this episode is where it's really nailing it in. This is all he does. Like, actually, Martin's journey in this episode is quite slim because he's just going on about getting shagged all the time. And they even bring Claire in for 30 seconds just to kind of come in and go, yeah, we've been having a shag.
I noticed that. Like, she just appears for that brief scene. And I wasn't really sure what was the point of that,
Yeah, she got paid for it, I guess.
Well, yeah, exactly. That's what I mean.
Maybe she was contracted for 6 episodes.
Yes, perhaps, yes. So Martin goes off for a shag, and Mandy is left with Matt, and they're watching telly, having a beer. And there's this sort of character shift. So previously it's been Mandy going out shagging. It feels really wrong, so I feel like Austin Powers using that word, but that is the word they use, so I'm going with it. Usually Mandy's off shagging and Martin is Matthew's wingman, and Mandy suddenly realizes, oh my goodness, I've become Martin.
Yeah. Well, do you know what? I want to pick up on something there. Use of alcohol, because they're having a beer and everything. I found in the show in general, the way they approached alcohol was very interesting.
Okay.
And again, to compare and contrast with something like Men Behaving Badly, which is like their entire raison d'etre is come home from work, get some beers open, and you just get slowly drunk on the settee, or you go to the pub and talk about Kylie's arse. We don't get alcohol used in the same way here. A lot of the time, they're not drinking alcohol at all. And then, so this scene here in this episode jumped out to me a little bit because they do. And then there's a later scene where they open the fridge and it's completely full of beer. But you don't see Matt drinking that often, and you never see him drunk. And Mandy and Martin gets drunk once and makes some terrible decisions, and Mandy tends to make bad decisions when she's drunk as well. And it very much is like getting drunk has negative consequences. It doesn't really hammer it home. But I think it's perhaps just a writing device. We need our character to do something a little bit foolish that they shouldn't do. Let's make them drunk in order to make that more believable. Drinking is not celebrated, I guess, is what I'm saying, which feels at odds with that lad culture.
Yeah. One of Matthew's constant refrains is, "Cup of tea, Martin!" And he's like,
It's
Martin has
tea,
to go and
yeah.
make him a cup of tea. Tea is the thing. And
Yeah.
God knows I can relate to that. But yeah, no, that's a really interesting observation. I hadn't noticed that.
It's an interesting observation, and I wonder, it doesn't feel like a deliberate thing. It doesn't feel like something they're trying to focus on. It just feels like, what it feels like is the writer is not in that kind of, yeah, we go and go to the pub every night and get drunk kind of vibe. And so they haven't put that in. But then it's like, oh no, you go out with your friends and you have a few wines and get pissed and then sleep with someone you probably shouldn't have. You know, it's that kind of attitude to drink. But that isn't the lad culture attitude to drink. But then, we do. So then we get Matt and Mandy just sat together somewhat unusually. And Matt opens up a bit. Mandy sort of pushes him a little bit. And perhaps he feels more comfortable talking to her than he would to Martin. He has to keep up this kind of facade of masculinity to Martin because it's all he's got. It's the only power he's got.
I think we're both a bit sick, really, don't you? I mean, you not able to go out and everything, and me with my work hang-ups and my sex hang-ups and my suicidal mood swings.
Speak for yourself, mate. There's nothing wrong with me. Just hate all that outside shit, that's all.
It's interesting in this scene because she says, oh, we're just a couple of sad bastards, aren't we, really? And then she's like, no, really. You are pathetic. Like, that's paraphrasing slightly, but she goes like, you're pathetic. Yeah. You can't even leave the house. And now I'm here stuck with you. And he just like, he hasn't got any argument against it when he's actually confronted it with it like that. It's like a bit too true.
She asked him why he doesn't go out, and he said, well, I just can't breathe when I think about going out, you know. It is a bit of a bonding moment, but then obviously he moves in for a shag because they've had a slight bonding moment.
Yeah.
And it sort of ruins the moment. But the scene ends with Matthew offering to go and make the tea, which is quite a moment. I think that might be the first time he's ever done it. Yeah, but that demonstrates that there has been something of a breakthrough.
And one of the most memorable episodes of Series 1 is when the Ben Chaplain Matt does leave the flat and he joins a band in the flat upstairs, and then ends up having to do a gig where he goes out to a pub and they're doing a pub gig. He's the singer. But because he's so terrified, he's just sort of screaming into the and it gets reviewed as a sort of avant-garde art performance,
that's right.
which is quite funny.
Right.
But I just bring that up because we've seen what the character feels like. He really struggles to get outside, and even with the much cooler version of Matt, he still shows that weakness. He still has that terrible, terrible weakness. And with the comedy version of Matt, it's played a much more for laughs, and it does get developed further in this series. We'll talk about that in a second. But right here, right now, we're setting up, in the next scene where Mandy talks to Martin, we're setting up her bringing in a friend of hers who is some sort of therapist who might be able to help.
Well, let me tell you my notes for this next scene. So we open with Martin, and these are the 3 notes I've made. Martin is mooning about his girlfriend's calves. Mandy is really bored of this. I know how she feels. But yes, you're right. The meat of this scene is Mandy being worried about Matt. Despite him being an absolute horror, she is genuinely worried about him. And she's decided she's going to get her friend Jason involved. You know, my friend Jason, the psychologist that's never been mentioned before. Oh, and he's gay as well, but don't tell Matthew. That probably won't come up. So we've got very clunky setup of this character Jason. So he's going to come in and help Matt with his agoraphobia. But we can't tell him that he's a psychologist because he won't have that. So what are we going to tell him?
Smash cut to...
So, you're Mandy's long-lost cousin who's been living in Australia for 10 years with his girlfriend. Yeah.
I really like this. It's like a meta joke.
It was very funny. It was a good
because
edit,
they smash cut, and it's like, if we're going to deliver a really over-the-top expositional line, let's make it a joke. It did work really well as a gag. And yeah, it does slightly break the fourth wall almost. It is just slightly meta gag, but in a way that works.
It worked really well. It worked really well.
Fine, yeah.
So there's the 4 of them now. There's the 3 of our flatmates plus Jason. And Martin's going out. She does deliver this line quite well. I'll be off then. Shagging. Which actually made me laugh. Even though I was annoyed with that bit of plot line, that did make me laugh. It's good timing. But interestingly, Jason starts talking about Australia, the great outdoors, and Matt starts freaking out. This is new. He's now freaking out just by talk of outside, which is like, okay, I'm not sure that's how agoraphobia works, but fair enough.
Well, they've had to ramp it up a bit for the sake of the scene, haven't they? Just to really hammer it home. In case you've never seen the show before, let's talk about Jason a little bit here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's talk about homosexuality in the mid-90s. Because Jason here is, obviously he's introduced as, oh, he's gay, that's why Mandy hasn't shagged him. But what we get as we go through this episode is a sort of strange flirtation between the two, where Matt may not be quite aware of it, and Jason fancies him. But we'll come into the details of that. But let's talk about the general expressions of homosexuality in Game On and the attitudes towards it.
Remember what I was saying earlier about misogyny and this kind of ringing a little bit too close to home for me? For me in the 90s, we thought we were absolutely cool with homosexuality. You know, it's absolutely fine, no problem. Yeah, some of my best friends are gay. All fine. But now I look at sort of my son's generation, and it really is just normal now. Whereas with us, it was like, well, it's fine. I mean, it's fine.
Well, that's totally cool and fine with me, because, you know, if that's what you want to do, then that's what you want to do. And if that's the way you feel, then that's fine. You know, I think gay people being gay is absolutely fine, and they should be as gay as they want, if they want, and I've got no problem with that whatsoever.
Which I guess was better than a generation earlier when it wasn't fine.
Yeah.
But it was still, I think it was still seen as different.
Yeah, I think it's one of those generational things. We're looking back 25 years here. That's quite a long time, really, in terms of our social progression.
But it is, but not when you've lived it. It doesn't feel like a long time.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, look, from when this episode went out, 25 years before that was the early 70s, you know, it's a totally different thing. I think you sort of see that comparison.
We can talk about this from a sociological point of view, but basically my problem here is that I feel old.
Yeah. I think overall, in terms of the show, I think what they do with Matt and over the course of this series and with the Jason character particularly, it's challenging his ideas of you know homosexuality. Let's jump forward slightly. Let's just jump forward to where they kiss.
Yes. So they're basically they've sort of bonded, and Jason's purpose of being here is basically to act as a psychologist without him knowing he's a psychologist, and get him talking, doing a bit of aversion therapy, get him thinking about going outside, that sort of thing. But in the meantime, Jason has fallen in love with Matt, because who wouldn't?
Well, the medical ethics involved there is sort of a bit.
Well, exactly. There's a lot.
Dodgy,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So well, let's cut forward to that scene. They're on Matt's bed and they're talking. You know, they're doing this aversion therapy. Matt is being very defensively misogynistic, like he's being alpha male in a way that's sort of turned up to 11,
in a totally performative way that you can see right through.
Yeah, exactly. And so he decides that Jason's saying, well, you know, I've not really had much experience with girls. And he's trying to sort of say, well, I'm gay, but without saying it. And Matt completely misinterprets that and decides he'll help Jason with girls and he gives him his sort of killer lines and his killer looks. And then he moves in and kisses him.
You want me. You cannot resist me. And somehow that thought transfers into their head. And their eyes go all soft. And that's when you know it's the moment to kiss them.
Yeah, two screams from the audience, the live audience.
Screams. Literal screams from the studio audience. Yeah.
A great line. Jason says, "Oh, can you show me again?" This is funny.
Yeah.
And then Matt sort of withdraws, and he doesn't
recoil. He doesn't. There's not like a big shock recoil. Oh my god.
Yeah, which would be the obvious choice, I think, wouldn't it? Yeah, but he does like, anyone would think we're a couple of arse bandits.
Yeah, but then what's the next line? The next line is, "Hey, we could have a bit of a wrestle if you want." Which to me suggests that Matt is kind of into this.
Well, this as it goes on, basically the Jason character is in for a few episodes, and this story develops slightly. And Matt never quite gets, what's going on, really. And then the other characters are sort of trying to talk to Matt about, like, look, being bisexual, that's fine. That's perfectly normal. It's like, it's not bisexual. We're just mates, we just like to have a bit of a naked wrestle. That's nothing wrong with that. It's funny in a 90s way. And
it's huge denial. And then, the scenario plays out with Jason is accidentally outed. So Matt discovers he's gay. This guy's gay, and he just can't cope with that because that would be acknowledging his feelings.
Yeah.
And so we have this, Jason leaves, and he says, "Well, if I leave now, you'll never speak to me again." And he brushes him off and allows him to go, despite the fact you can tell he has got feelings.
Even if it is just as this is someone he's enjoyed spending time with, and he's had a friend and someone that he's not been alone for a while. In terms of that cultural progression, having that storyline, having someone struggling to deal with a potentially being bisexual, even though everyone around them says, look, it's fine, is not something you would have done 10 years earlier in the mid-80s. And I think you could do this storyline now with that same character. If you had a character in a show now who's a bit of a lad and doesn't quite, he's a bit of, oh no, I'm a masculine guy, and then he's like confronted by the idea that, maybe a bit like, maybe I can be attracted to another man. I think it would play out in relatively the same way. And that's one way where this hasn't aged. Because it feels in this sense, what it's doing with this story is challenging the status quo. Yeah. It's challenging that kind of like, this is what the 90s is saying, but let's push it a bit, let's push it. And so it feels like it's a little bit ahead of its time. Well, that's all we've got time for this week, but come back next time where we will discuss the other actors involved and the writers as well. That's quite an interesting little pairing there. In the meantime, if you'd like to get in touch, we're on the social medias at BritcomPod, where we post little tidbits and pictures and clips and all sorts of stuff, so come along and join the conversation there. So, until next time, so long!